Don't untie me. They're watching us. The woman's desperate whisper cut through the Oregon midnight like a blade. Daniel Hayes gripped his steering wheel, his feverish sun burning up in the back seat as his headlights illuminated the impossible. A woman in a torn business suit tied to an oak tree, a crude sign above her head, "White man don't forgive." What would you do? Would you stop? Would you help stay with me to discover how one father's choice that night would expose a conspiracy that had already killed hundreds, including his own wife? Comment below which city you're watching from. Let's see how far this story reaches. The fever had come on suddenly just after dinner. One moment, 8-year-old Tommy Hayes was helping his father clear the table in their modest Oregon home, and the next he was burning up his small body, trembling with chills that no amount of blankets could chase away. Daniel Hayes had waited exactly 30 minutes, watching the clock, pressing cool washcloths to his son's forehead, whispering the same reassurances his late wife Rachel would have offered before making the decision to drive to the emergency room in Cascade Falls, 20 miles away. It was 11:47 p.m. when Daniel loaded Tommy into the back seat of his aging Ford pickup. The boy wrapped in his mother's quilt, the one that still carried the faint scent of her lavender perfume 18 months after the cancer had taken her. The rural Oregon back roads were empty, dark ribbons, cutting through towering Douglas firs that blocked out even the starlight. Daniel drove carefully but urgently, one eye on the speedometer, the other flicking to the rearview mirror where Tommy lay curled on his side, whimpering softly. "Almost there, buddy, Toms," Daniel murmured, though they were still 12 miles from town. "The doctors will fix you right up. Remember when you broke your arm last summer? They had you patched up in no time." Tommy didn't respond, lost in the haze of fever. Daniel pressed harder on the accelerator, the truck's engine groaning in protest. He'd meant to get it serviced last month, but overtime at Riverbend Industries had been mandatory again. Not that he was complaining. Single fathers couldn't afford to be picky about extra hours, even if it meant breathing in sawdust and chemicals 60 hours a week at the mill that employed half of Havens Grove. The headlights swept around a sharp curve and Daniel instinctively hit the brakes. There, illuminated in the harsh white glare like some macabre theater production, was a sight that made his blood freeze. An enormous oak tree stood alone in a small clearing just off the road, its gnarled branches reaching toward the sky like arthritic fingers. But it wasn't the tree that made Daniel's heart race, it was what was attached to it. A woman was tied to the trunk, her arms pulled back around the massive tree, her wrists bound with rough rope that had left dark stains on her torn silk blouse. Her head hung forward, dark hair cascading over her face, but Daniel could see she was breathing shallow, rapid breaths that made her shoulders rise and fall. Above her, nailed to the tree with rusty spikes, was a piece of plywood with words painted in what looked like dried blood, "White man don't forgive." Daniel sat frozen for a moment, his mind trying to process what he was seeing. This couldn't be real. This was Havens Grove, population 8,000, where the biggest crime in the last year had been teenagers spray painting the water tower. This kind of thing, whatever this was, didn't happen here. Tommy moaned in the back seat, the sound breaking Daniel's paralysis. He couldn't leave. No matter how much every instinct screamed at him to drive away to protect his son, to avoid whatever danger had led to this scene, he couldn't leave another human being tied to a tree in the middle of the night. "Tommy," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, "I need to stop for just a minute, okay? There's someone who needs help. I'll be right outside the truck. You stay here under Mom's quilt." The boy mumbled something incoherent, lost in his fever dreams. Daniel reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the flashlight he kept there, its weight reassuring in his hand. He also grabbed the folding knife from the center console, not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. The night air was cool and damp when he stepped out carrying the scent of pine and something else, something acrid and chemical that made his nose wrinkle. It reminded him of the smell that sometimes drifted from Riverbend's waste treatment facility when the wind was wrong. He approached slowly, sweeping the flashlight beam across the clearing, looking for any sign of whoever had done this. "Ma'am?" he called softly when he was about 10 feet away. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" The woman's head snapped up, and Daniel saw her face clearly for the first time. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe early 30s, with sharp features and intelligent green eyes that were wide with terror. Her left cheek was swollen, a purple bruise spreading across her cheekbone, and there was dried blood at the corner of her mouth. "No," she whispered, her voice hoarse and desperate. "Don't come closer. Don't untie me." Daniel stopped, confused. "What, ma'am, you need help? I'm going to call 911 and—" "No." The word came out as a harsh rasp. "No police, no calls. They're watching us. Right now. If you untie me, if you call anyone, they'll kill us both." Daniel's hand instinctively went to the knife in his pocket. He scanned the darkness beyond the reach of his flashlight, seeing nothing but shadows between the trees. "Who's watching? Who did this to you?" The woman's eyes darted around wildly. "Please just get back in your truck and drive away. Pretend you never saw me. You have a child with you, I heard you talking. Think of your child." "I am thinking of him," Daniel said, taking another step closer. "And I'm thinking that I can't leave you here. Whatever's going on, whoever did this, we can figure it out. But first I need to get you free." "You don't understand," she said, and now tears were streaming down her face, cutting pale tracks through the dirt and blood. "This isn't random. This isn't some psycho. This is about Riverbend Industries. This is about what I know." Daniel felt his stomach drop. Riverbend Industries, his employer, the company that owned the mill, the lumber yards, half the commercial real estate in Havens Grove, the company whose logo was on his paycheck, whose health insurance had covered Rachel's treatments until the very end. "What about Riverbend?" he asked, though part of him didn't want to know. The woman looked at him, then really looked at him, and he saw her notice his Riverbend Industries cap on the dashboard of his truck, visible through the windshield. Her face crumpled in despair. "Oh God, you work for them. You're one of them." "I work at the mill, yes, but I'm not one of them, whatever that means," Daniel said firmly. "I'm a floor supervisor. I run a saw line, that's it. Now tell me what's going on." She studied his face for a long moment, then seemed to make a decision. "My name is Alexandra Novak. I'm an environmental analyst with the EPA. I've been investigating Riverbend for the last 6 months. 3 hours ago, I was grabbed from my motel room by men in masks. They brought me here, tied me up, and told me this was a warning to me and to anyone else who might come looking." "EPA." Daniel's mind raced. "What were you investigating?" "The water," Alexandra said simply. "Your drinking water. The groundwater that feeds the wells for all of Havens Grove and the surrounding county. Riverbend has been dumping industrial waste illegally for 20 years. Benzene, formaldehyde, heavy metals, all of it seeping into the aquifer. The cancer rates in this area are 3 times the national average. Haven't you noticed?" Daniel's knees nearly buckled. Rachel's face flashed before his eyes, pale and thin in the hospital bed. Her beautiful hair gone, her body ravaged by the acute myeloid leukemia that had taken her in just 4 months. The doctors had called it aggressive unusual, the type more commonly seen in people exposed to industrial chemicals. "My wife," he whispered. "She died of leukemia 18 months ago." Alexandra's expression softened. "I'm sorry. She's not the only one. I have files dozens of cases all linked to contaminated well water. Riverbend knows. They've known for years. They've been falsifying their environmental reports, bribing inspectors, threatening anyone who asks questions. And they did this to you because you found proof." "I have proof," she corrected. "Hidden. Documented evidence that could shut them down, could send executives to prison. They want to know where it is. This." She gestured with her chin at her bound state. "This is meant to scare me into giving it up, or to serve as a warning to anyone else who might come looking when I disappear." Daniel stood there in the darkness, his flashlight beam wavering slightly as his hand trembled. In the truck, Tommy coughed a harsh barking sound that carried through the open window. His sick child, his job, his entire life in Havens Grove, everything hung in the balance of this moment. "If I untie you," he said slowly, "what happens?" "I don't know," Alexandra admitted. "They said they'd be watching. They said if anyone helped me, they'd make sure that person lost everything: job, home, family. They were very specific about the family part." Daniel thought of Tommy burning with fever in the back seat. He thought of Rachel dying in a hospital bed, possibly poisoned by the very company that employed him. He thought of all the other families in Havens Grove drinking the water, trusting that it was safe. The hell with them, he said, pulling out his knife. No, wait. Alexandra started, but Daniel was already moving. He circled around behind the tree, found the knots in the rope. They were tight professional, but his knife was sharp, and his hands were steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. As he worked, he kept talking, partly to reassure Alexandra, partly to keep his own fear at bay. I've lived in Havens Grove my whole life, he said. My parents lived here, my grandparents. This town, these people, they're good people. They deserve to know if they're being poisoned. They deserve justice. Justice doesn't come easy when you're fighting a company worth $2 billion, Alexandra said, wincing as the rope loosened and blood flow returned to her hands. Maybe not, Daniel agreed, finally cutting through the last strand. But that doesn't mean we don't try. Alexandra stumbled forward as the rope fell away, and Daniel caught her arm to steady her. She was shorter than he'd realized, barely coming up to his shoulder, but there was a strength in her eyes that hadn't been broken by whatever ordeal she'd endured. You have a sick child, she said, nodding toward the truck. You should take him to the hospital and forget you ever saw me. I can take care of myself from here. No offense, ma'am, but you were just tied to a tree, Daniel pointed out. Your car... They took it, along with my phone, my laptop, everything except... She paused, her hand going to her collar. Daniel could see a thin chain around her neck disappearing beneath her torn blouse. Never mind. You're coming with us, Daniel decided. I'll take Tommy to the emergency room and we'll figure out what to do from there. You don't understand the risk you're taking. I understand that my wife might have died because of contaminated water, Daniel said harshly. I understand that my son drinks that same water every day. I understand that someone tied you to a tree because you were trying to expose the truth. That's all I need to understand. They moved toward the truck, Alexandra limping, slightly favoring her left ankle. Daniel kept his flashlight moving, scanning the darkness, but he saw no one. If they were being watched, the watchers were keeping their distance. When they reached the truck, Daniel opened the passenger door for Alexandra, then checked on Tommy in the back. The boy's fever seemed to have broken. He was sleeping more peacefully now, though his face was still flushed. He's beautiful, Alexandra said softly. How old? 8, Daniel replied, pulling back onto the road. His name's Tommy. He's all I have left. They drove in silence for a few minutes, the truck's headlights cutting through the darkness. Daniel kept checking his mirrors, looking for any sign they were being followed, but the road remained empty. The evidence you mentioned, he said finally. Where is it? Alexandra was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she reached inside her collar and pulled out the chain he'd noticed earlier. Hanging from it was a small USB drive no bigger than his thumbnail. Everything's on here, she said. 20 years of documents, internal memos, lab reports, showing the real contamination levels, records of bribes, even recorded conversations of executives discussing the cover-up. I encrypted it and uploaded copies to secure cloud servers, but this is the physical proof. How did you get all that? I had help. Someone on the inside, someone with access who couldn't stand the guilt anymore. They're dead now. Car accident 3 weeks ago, just 2 days after they gave me the last batch of files. Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Murder. Probably, but made to look accidental. These people don't leave loose ends. She tucked the USB drive back under her shirt. Which is why you should drop me at the hospital entrance and drive away. Take your son home, go to work tomorrow like nothing happened. Live your life. Live my life, Daniel repeated bitterly. In a town that's being poisoned, working for the company that's doing it. What kind of life is that? A safe one. A living one. They were approaching the outskirts of Cascade Falls now. Streetlights beginning to appear, the occasional house with windows glowing warmly in the night. Normal life, Daniel thought. Normal people living normal lives, not knowing that their water might be killing them slowly and visibly. My wife was 34 when she died, he said quietly. 34 years old, healthy, her whole life never smoked, rarely drank, exercised every day. 4 months from diagnosis to death. The doctors couldn't explain why the cancer was so aggressive. Now maybe I know. I'm sorry, Alexandra said again, and he could hear the genuine sympathy in her voice. But bringing down Riverbend won't bring her back. No, Daniel agreed. But it might save others. It might mean Tommy doesn't lose his father the same way he lost his mother. It might mean other kids don't have to grow up without parents. The emergency room entrance was ahead now, brightly lit an ambulance parked outside. Daniel pulled into a parking space and turned off the engine. For a moment they sat in silence, both understanding that once they walked through those doors, there would be no going back. "I have a plan," Alexandra said suddenly. "Or the beginning of one. But I need help. I need someone who knows the town knows the people, someone who works at Riverbend who could get me inside access." "That's insane. After what they did to you tonight. They were trying to scare me off. It didn't work. If anything, it proved how desperate they are, how close I am to exposing everything." She turned to face him fully. "Look, I understand if you can't help. You have Tommy to think about. But if you're serious about wanting justice for your wife, for everyone who's been hurt, then I need you to think about something." "What?" "Tomorrow you'll go to work like normal. You'll clock in, do your job, act like nothing's happened. But you'll also be my eyes and ears inside Riverbend. You'll help me understand their security, their routines, their weak points. And when the time is right, when I have everything I need, we'll bring them down together." Daniel looked at Tommy in the back seat, his innocent face peaceful in sleep. He thought about all the other children in Havens Grove playing in yards, watered with contaminated water, brushing their teeth with it, drinking it every day of their lives. He thought about Rachel, how she'd want him to be brave to do the right thing, even when it was dangerous. "Okay," he said, "but we do this smart. No unnecessary risks. Tommy's already lost his mother. He's not losing his father, too." "Agreed," Alexandra said. She held out her hand and he shook it, her grip surprisingly firm despite everything she'd been through. "Partners. Partners." They got out of the truck, Daniel carefully lifting Tommy into his arms. The boy stirred but didn't wake, his head resting on his father's shoulder. As they walked toward the emergency room entrance, Alexandra limping beside them, Daniel noticed a black SUV parked across the street, its windows tinted engine running. "Don't look," Alexandra murmured. "Just keep walking." They entered the hospital, the bright fluorescent lights making them both squint. The triage nurse looked up, took in Alexandra's torn clothes and bruised face, Tommy's feverish appearance, and immediately called for assistance. "What happened?" the nurse asked, already moving toward them. "Car accident," Alexandra said smoothly. "Hit a deer on Route 26. This man stopped to help. His son's sick fever, possible flu." The nurse nodded, not questioning the story. This was rural Oregon. Deer accidents were common enough. "We'll get you both treated right away. Sir, bring your son this way." "Ma'am, can you walk?" "I can manage," Alexandra said. As medical staff converged on them, separating them into different examination areas, Alexandra caught Daniel's eye. "Tomorrow," she mouthed silently. Daniel nodded, following a nurse who was already fussing over Tommy, taking his temperature, checking his vitals. As he settled his son onto an examination bed, Daniel's mind was racing. Tomorrow, he would go to work at Riverbend Industries. Tomorrow, he would begin a dangerous game of deception that could cost him everything. But tonight, he had saved a woman's life. Tonight, he had learned the possible truth about his wife's death. Tonight, everything had changed. A doctor entered the room, introducing himself as Dr. Martinez, and began examining Tommy. Daniel answered the routine questions when the fever started. Any other symptoms, medical history. But his thoughts kept returning to Alexandra's words. 20 years of contamination. How many people had died? How many were sick right now and didn't know why? "Mr. Hayes," Dr. Martinez was saying, "did you hear me? I said Tommy's going to be fine. It's just a viral infection. We'll give him some fluids medication to bring down the fever, and you can take him home in a few hours." "Thank you." Daniel managed relief flooding through him. At least this Tommy's illness wasn't connected to the water. Not yet, anyway. As the doctor left and a nurse set up an IV for Tommy, Daniel pulled out his phone. He had 17 missed calls from work, the night shift supervisor wondering where he was. He was supposed to have been there an hour ago for overtime. He sent a quick text about Tommy being sick, then put the phone away. Through the small window in the door, he could see down the hall to where Alexandra was being treated. A police officer had arrived and was speaking with her, taking notes. She was sticking to the deer accident story he could tell from her gestures, pointing to her injuries, as if explaining how she'd been thrown from a vehicle. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, then thought better of it. "Hello, Mr. Hayes." The voice was deep, unfamiliar, professionally pleasant. "This is Victor Hammond, CEO of Riverbend Industries. I understand you've had quite an evening." Daniel's blood ran cold. "How did you get this number?" "Mr. Hayes, I make it my business to know everything about my employees, especially ones who stop to help strangers on dark roads. Very admirable, by the way. Very heroic. What do you want?" "Simply to check on you and your son. I heard young Tommy is ill. Such a worry for a single parent. Medical bills can be so overwhelming even with insurance. Unless, of course, one has the full Platinum Care package that we offer to our most valued employees." The threat was subtle but clear. Play along or lose everything. "Tommy's fine," Daniel said stiffly. "Just a virus." "I'm so glad to hear it. And the woman you helped, the one from the accident?" "I don't know anything about her." "Of course you don't. Good man, smart man. I do hope she recovers quickly and moves on from our little town. It would be such a shame if she lingered and caused complications." "Is that a threat?" "A threat?" Hammond sounded genuinely amused. "Mr. Hayes, I don't make threats, I simply observe patterns. For instance, I observe that employees who focus on their work and their families tend to prosper. Those who get distracted by outside influences tend to face difficulties. Accidents happen after all. Your poor wife knew that all too well." Daniel gripped the phone so hard he thought it might crack. "What did you say about my wife?" "Only that her death was a tragedy. Cancer is such a terrible disease. No one really knows what causes it, do they? Could be genetics, could be lifestyle, could be environmental factors. So hard to prove anything definitively." "You son of a I'd be very careful about what you say next, Mr. Hayes. Your son needs you. He needs stability, safety, a father who comes home every night. Don't you agree?" Daniel forced himself to breathe, to think of Tommy sleeping peacefully on the hospital bed. "Yes." "Excellent. Then we understand each other. I'll expect you at work tomorrow. We'll overlook tonight's absence given the circumstances. And Mr. Hayes, that woman you helped? I trust you won't be seeing her again." The line went dead. Daniel stood there, phone in hand, rage and fear warring in his chest. They knew. They knew he'd found Alexandra, knew he was at the hospital, knew everything. The black SUV outside hadn't been there by coincidence. A soft knock at the door made him turn. Alexandra stood there, a bandage on her cheek, her ankle wrapped, wearing a hospital gown instead of her torn clothes. "We need to talk," she said quietly, closing the door behind her. "They know," Daniel said immediately. "Victor Hammond just called me, CEO of Riverbend. He knows I helped you." Alexandra's face paled, but her jaw set determinedly. "Then we move faster than planned. How much do you know about Riverbend's computer systems?" "What, I'm a floor supervisor, not IT." "But you have access to the building, to the computers. You have a login and password." "Yes, but that's all I need. Tomorrow you're going to plug this into any computer connected to their network." She pulled a second USB drive from somewhere. Daniel didn't want to know where she'd been hiding it. "It's a program that will give me remote access to their servers. I can download everything, emails, financial records, documentation they thought they deleted." "That's illegal." "So is poisoning an entire town. So is murder. So is what they did to me tonight." She stepped closer and he could see the fierce determination in her eyes. "They've already threatened you. They've already made you a target. The only way out now is through. We get enough evidence to bring in federal authorities, too much evidence for them to bury or buy their way out of." Daniel looked at Tommy, then back at Alexandra. "If they catch me, they won't. The program is invisible, untraceable. It'll look like normal system operations. You plug it in, leave it for 30 seconds, take it out. That's it. And then I gather everything I need, we compile it with what I already have, and we take it to the FBI, the EPA, the media, everyone at once. They can't fight on all fronts simultaneously." Daniel took the USB drive, feeling its weight negligible, physically enormous in terms of what it represented. "There's something else. Hammond mentioned my wife implied they knew something about her cancer. Do you think, could they have deliberately? Alexandra's expression was grim. I've seen cases where whistleblowers or problematic employees developed sudden health issues. It's almost impossible to prove deliberate poisoning, especially with something that causes cancer over time. But given what I know about Riverbend's practices, I wouldn't rule it out. The rage that had been simmering in Daniel's chest crystallized into cold determination. Tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. Are you sure? Once you do this, there's no going back. Daniel looked at his sleeping son, thought of his dead wife, thought of all the families in Havens Grove who didn't know they were being slowly poisoned. I'm sure. Alexandra reached out and squeezed his hand. Thank you. I know this isn't what you signed up for when you stopped to help me. Maybe it is, Daniel said. Maybe this is exactly what I signed up for. Rachel always said things happen for a reason. Maybe the reason I found you tonight was to finally get justice for her, for everyone. Before Alexandra could respond, the door opened and the nurse returned checking Tommy's IV and vitals. Alexandra slipped out, returning to her own examination room. Daniel settled into the chair beside his son's bed, his mind racing with plans and possibilities. Tomorrow would change everything. Tomorrow, he would walk into Riverbend Industries not as Daniel Hayes' floor supervisor, but as Daniel Hayes' spy. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, for the first time since Rachel's death, he felt a sense of purpose. As Tommy stirred in his sleep, Daniel reached out and brushed the hair from his son's forehead. I'm going to make this right, buddy, he whispered. For Mom, for you, for everyone. I promise. Outside, the black SUV still sat in the parking lot waiting, watching. But Daniel was no longer afraid. They had made a crucial mistake in threatening him and invoking Rachel's memory. They had transformed his fear into fury, his doubt into determination. The war for Havens Grove had begun. The morning came too quickly. Daniel hadn't slept, spending the remaining hours at the hospital, watching Tommy's fever break completely, then driving home as dawn painted the Oregon sky in shades of gray and pink. The USB drive Alexandra had given him felt like it was burning a hole in his pocket. He transferred it to his wallet, tucked behind an old photo of Rachel, the two items that represented his past and future, sitting side by side. Tommy was still weak but improving, and Daniel called Mrs. Chen from next door to watch him for the day. She arrived at 7:30 carrying a pot of homemade soup and clucking sympathetically over Tommy's pale complexion. You sure you have to work today? She asked, settling Tommy on the couch with cartoons and orange juice. That mill won't fall apart without you for one day. Bills don't pay themselves, Daniel said, though the real reason sat hidden in his wallet. I'll try to get home early. But The drive to Riverbend Industries took 20 minutes along the same road where he'd found Alexandra less than 12 hours ago. In daylight, the oak tree stood innocent and unremarkable, no sign of the horror it had witnessed except for some scuff marks in the dirt and the nail holes where the sign had been. Someone had cleaned up quickly and efficiently. The mill sprawled across 40 acres on the outskirts of Havens Grove, a massive complex of buildings, warehouses, and processing facilities. The main gate guard, Pete Morrison, waved him through with barely a glance. Just another day, Daniel told himself. Just another normal day. Except nothing was normal anymore. As he parked in his usual spot, Daniel noticed things he'd never paid attention to before. The security cameras at every corner, the black SUVs in the executive parking area, the way the administrative building's windows were all tinted, preventing anyone from seeing inside. Hayes, the voice made him jump. Ron Kowalski, his shift supervisor, was walking toward him, coffee in hand. Heard your boy was sick last night. Everything okay? Yeah, just a virus. He's better this morning. Ron nodded, but Daniel noticed he wasn't quite meeting his eyes. Hammond wants to see you in his office. Now. Daniel's stomach clenched. What about... Didn't say, just said to send you up as soon as you arrived. Ron paused, then added quietly, Be careful, Dan. Something's going on. There have been suits crawling all over the place since yesterday. The executive floor of the administrative building was a different world from the mill floor. Thick carpets, muffled footsteps, abstract art decorated the walls, and the air smelled of expensive cologne instead of sawdust and chemicals. Daniel had only been up here twice before, once when he was promoted to supervisor, once for Rachel's funeral, when Hammond had personally offered his condolences. Hammond's secretary, a severe-looking woman named Margaret, gestured him toward the massive oak doors without looking up from her computer. "He's expecting you." Victor Hammond's office was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire mill complex. The desk was a massive slab of polished wood that probably cost more than Daniel made in a year. And behind it sat Hammond himself, 60 years old, silver-haired, with the kind of tan that came from golf courses and yacht clubs rather than honest work. "Daniel," Hammond said warmly, rising to shake his hand. His grip was firm, his smile practiced. "Please sit. Can I get you anything, coffee, water?" "I'm fine." "Of course. How's Tommy feeling? Better, I hope." "Much better, thank you." Hammond settled back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. "Good, good. Family health is so important. It's why we provide such comprehensive insurance coverage for our employees." He paused, letting that sink in. "I wanted to speak with you about last night. I told you on the phone I don't know anything about—" Hammond held up a hand. "Please, let's not insult each other's intelligence. The woman you helped, Alexandra Novak, is a troubled individual. She's been harassing our company for months with baseless accusations, conspiracy theories. Mental illness is such a sad thing." "She seemed pretty lucid to me." "I'm sure she did. People with paranoid delusions often seem quite rational, quite convincing. Did she tell you about the supposed evidence she has, the documents that prove we're poisoning the water?" Daniel kept his face neutral. "She mentioned something about contamination." Hammond laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Contamination. Yes, that's her favorite word. Let me show you something." He pulled out a folder, spreading papers across the desk. "These are our environmental compliance reports for the last 5 years. Every test, every inspection, all showing we meet or exceed federal standards. We've won awards for our environmental stewardship, Daniel." The documents looked official, impressive, with EPA letterheads and official seals. But Daniel remembered Alexandra's words about falsified reports and bribed inspectors. "Now," Hammond continued, his tone shifting, becoming harder. "This woman is dangerous, not physically perhaps, but to our company's reputation, to the livelihoods of the 800 people we employ. If her lies gain traction, if investors get spooked, the mill could close. 800 jobs gone. The economic backbone of Havens Grove shattered." "So you had her tied to a tree?" Hammond's eyes flashed dangerously. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Hayes. Do you have any proof of that? Any evidence that anyone from Riverbend was involved in whatever happened to Ms. Novak?" Daniel said nothing. "I thought not. For all we know, she staged the whole thing herself. Wouldn't be the first time an activist created a fake attack for attention." Hammond stood, moving to the window. "I built this company from nothing. My father worked in these mills when they were just a few buildings and a dream. I've devoted my life to providing jobs, supporting this community. I won't let some outsider with an agenda destroy that." "What do you want from me?" Hammond turned back, his expression paternal. "I want you to be smart. I want you to think about what's best for Tommy, for your future. And I want you to tell me if Miss Novak contacts you again. And if she doesn't, then we forget this conversation ever happened. You continue being one of our most valued supervisors. In fact, I've been thinking about promoting you to shift manager. Comes with a substantial raise, enough that you could move to a better neighborhood, maybe one with newer pipes, better water." The implication was clear. Play along and prosper. Resist and suffer. Daniel stood. "Is that all?" "One more thing." Hammond returned to his desk, pulling out a photograph. It was Daniel and Alexandra at the hospital, taken from a distance, but clear enough. "We know she gave you something. Something small, electronic perhaps. I'd very much like to know what that was." "She didn't give me anything." Hammond studied him for a long moment. "Very well. But Daniel, understand this. I know everything that happens in my company. Every computer login, every file accessed, every USB port that's used. If someone were to try something foolish like uploading malware or stealing data, I would know instantly, and the consequences would be severe." The threat hung in the air between them. Daniel nodded once and left his heart pounding. In the elevator, he pulled out his phone and found a text from an unknown number, library, local history section, 2 p.m., A. The rest of the morning crawled by. Daniel went through the motions of his job supervising the saw line checking quality control filing reports, but his mind was elsewhere processing what Hammond had said. They were watching the computers. Any attempt to use Alexandra's USB drive would be detected immediately. At lunch, instead of eating in the break room as usual, Daniel drove to Havens Grove Public Library. He wasn't meeting Alexandra until 2, but he needed time to think. The library was quiet, mostly empty except for a few retirees reading newspapers and a mother with young children in the picture book section. Daniel found himself in the periodical archives pulling out newspapers from 18 months ago, around the time Rachel got sick. He'd been too devastated then to pay attention to anything beyond her illness, but now he looked with fresh eyes. There it was buried on page 6, cancer rates in Havens Grove continue rising. The article quoted health officials calling it a statistical anomaly and recommending more study. He pulled more papers going back years. The pattern was there if you looked for it. Rising cancer rates. Unusual illnesses all explained away as coincidence or lifestyle factors. Never once was Riverbend Industries mentioned as a possible cause. Finding some interesting reading, Daniel looked up to find Alexandra standing beside him. She looked different. Her hair was dyed blonde, she wore glasses, and her clothes were deliberately dowdy, a disguise but a good one. How did you get here? They're watching. I'm good at not being seen when I need to be, she said, sitting down beside him. Tell me about your meeting with Hammond. Daniel recounted the conversation, including the warning about computer monitoring. Alexandra frowned, processing this information. He's scared, she said finally. More scared than I realized. The fact that he met with you personally made threats he wouldn't do that unless he felt cornered. He didn't seem scared to me. Men like Hammond never do. But think about it, why threaten you at all? Why not just fire you? Make up some excuse. Because he needs to know what you know, needs to control the situation. That means we're closer than I thought. She pulled out a different USB drive, this one even smaller than the first. Plan B. This one doesn't need to be plugged into a computer. It just needs to be within 3 feet of any network device for about 10 minutes. It uses Bluetooth frequencies to create a bridge, slower than direct access but undetectable. How am I supposed to get it near a computer for 10 minutes without being noticed? You're creative. Maybe during a meeting in the conference room, slip it behind a picture frame, or in the break room near the communal computer. Even better, if you can get it near Hammond's office, his secretary's desk would be perfect. Daniel took the device, noting how it looked exactly like a broken piece of plastic. Nothing suspicious at all. This is insane. If they catch me, they won't. And Daniel, I found something else last night. Alexandra pulled out a folder from her bag. After I left the hospital, I went to the county records office. Your wife's medical records were sealed, but I have contacts. Look at this. It was a toxicology report dated 2 weeks before Rachel's cancer diagnosis. Daniel had never seen it before. The levels of benzene and formaldehyde in her blood were highlighted in red with a note extremely elevated. Recommend immediate environmental investigation. This was never given to us, Daniel said, his voice shaking. The doctors never mentioned, because Riverbend made sure they didn't. Look at the bottom of the page. There was a stamp reviewed by Hammond Industries Medical Board. No action required. They have their own medical board. Daniel was incredulous. They have their fingers in everything. The hospital board, the city council, the police department. Havens Grove isn't just a company town. It's their kingdom, and Hammond is the king. Daniel stared at the report, rage building in his chest. They knew. They knew what was killing her, and they covered it up. I'm sorry, Alexandra said softly. I know this doesn't make it easier. No, it makes it clearer. Daniel pocketed the USB device. I'll plant this today, whatever it takes. Be careful. If Hammond suspects you're working with me, I know the risks. Daniel stood. There's something else. Hammond mentioned other suits being around the mill. Have you contacted anyone else? Alexandra frowned. No, just you. That's concerning. Either their internal security or… She paused, thinking. Or someone else is investigating them. FBI maybe, or another federal agency. That could be good for us or very bad if Riverbend is preparing to destroy evidence. They agreed to meet again that evening at a truck stop 20 miles outside town. Daniel returned to work the tiny USB device, feeling enormous in his pocket. He spent the afternoon observing planning, looking for the perfect opportunity. It came at 3:45. Margaret Hammond's secretary left her desk for her afternoon break. Always exactly 15 minutes, always to the executive bathroom, where she smoked a cigarette by the window, thinking no one knew. Daniel had been called to fix a problem with the saw line that required him to get authorization from the front office. The security guard at the executive floor knew him, waved him through. The hallway was empty. Daniel moved quickly but casually like he belonged there. At Margaret's desk, he pretended to look for a form while slipping the USB device behind her computer monitor, wedged against the wall where it wouldn't be seen. The whole thing took less than 30 seconds. He was halfway to the elevator when Hammond's office door opened. The CEO emerged with two men in dark suits, definitely federal agents of some kind, their bearing screaming government. Daniel busied himself with a bulletin board, pretending to read safety notices. "We appreciate your cooperation, Mr. Hammond," one of the agents was saying. "We'll be in touch if we need anything else." "Always happy to help," Hammond replied smoothly, but Daniel could hear the tension beneath. Riverbend has nothing to hide. The agents left and Hammond's gaze fell on Daniel. For a moment, neither moved. Then Hammond smiled cold and knowing. "Still here. Mr. Hayes' shift ended an hour ago." "Paperwork," Daniel said. "Quality control reports from this morning's run." "Dedicated? I like that." Hammond's eyes narrowed slightly. "Don't stay too late. Your son needs you home." Another threat, subtle but clear. Daniel nodded and left, forcing himself not to run. In his truck, he texted the unknown number, "Package delivered." The response was immediate. "Good. Get out of there. Now." Daniel didn't need to be told twice. As he drove through the main gate, he noticed two more black SUVs arriving, moving fast toward the administrative building. Something was happening. Something big. At home, Mrs. Chen reported that Tommy had been feeling better eating soup and even playing a bit. Daniel thanked her overpaying for her time and settled in with his son for what he hoped would be a quiet evening. But his phone kept buzzing with texts from coworkers. Rumors were flying federal agents at the mill computers being seized, documents being shredded in the executive offices. At 8 o'clock, Daniel told Tommy he had to run to the store. The boy barely looked up from his video game, and Daniel felt guilty for lying but knew it was necessary. The truck stop was mostly empty when he arrived, just a few long-haul truckers grabbing coffee and diesel. Alexandra was waiting in a corner booth, a laptop open in front of her. Her eyes were bright with excitement. "It's working," she said without preamble. "The device is transmitting perfectly. I'm downloading everything, emails, financial records, even Hammond's personal files." "Daniel, this is bigger than we thought." She turned the laptop toward him. The screen showed an email thread between Hammond and someone identified only as VS. The subject line was Havens Grove Problem Final Solution. Daniel read, his blood running cold. The emails discussed not just the contamination cover-up, but active plans to increase dumping in certain areas where problematic elements lived. There was a list of names, people who had asked questions, filed complaints, threatened lawsuits. Rachel Hayes was on the list, dated 6 months before her diagnosis. "They murdered her," Daniel said, his voice hollow. "They deliberately poisoned her because she was asking questions about water quality at the school where she taught." "I'm so sorry," Alexandra said. "But Daniel, there's more. Look at this." Another email thread, this one discussing plans to catastrophically fail a containment pond, making it look like an accident. The resulting spill would contaminate the groundwater for the entire valley, but insurance would cover the cleanup, and Riverbend would make millions while buying up the poisoned land cheap. "When?" Daniel asked. According to this, within the next week. They're accelerating their timeline because of the federal investigation. They'd rather cause a disaster they can control than let investigators find evidence of 20 years of deliberate poisoning. "We have to stop them." "We will. I'm downloading everything now. By morning, I'll have enough to send to every major news outlet, the FBI, the EPA, everyone. They won't be able to—" She stopped, her face paling. On the screen, a new window had popped up. A message in red text, "Hello, Ms. Novak, nice try." The laptop screen went black, then smoke started rising from the keyboard. "Get back!" Alexandra shouted, pushing Daniel away as the laptop burst into flames. The entire thing was destroyed in seconds, reduced to melted plastic and twisted metal. "How?" Daniel asked, stunned. "They found the device. They traced it back." Alexandra was already moving, grabbing her bag. "We need to go. Now." Through the window, Daniel could see vehicles approaching, fast black SUVs with tinted windows. Not government plates, private security. "My truck. Leave it. Back door now." They ran through the kitchen, startling a cook who shouted after them. Behind them, Daniel could hear car doors slamming, men's voices shouting orders. The back door led to a small parking area where delivery trucks unloaded. An old Honda Civic sat there, keys still in the ignition, probably belonged to the cook. "We can't steal," Daniel started. "We can apologize later," Alexandra said, jumping in the driver's seat. They peeled out just as the first security guard rounded the corner. Daniel looked back to see more men swarming the truck stop surrounding his vehicle. His phone started ringing Hammond's number. He didn't answer. Alexandra drove fast, but smart, taking back roads, doubling back, making sure they weren't followed. Finally, she pulled into an abandoned barn about 10 miles from town. "We're blown," she said. "They know who you are, where you live. You can't go home." "Tommy." "They won't hurt him. Bad optics to go after a kid directly, but they'll use him as leverage against you." She pulled out the original USB drive, the one she'd shown him at the hospital. "This is all we have left. The evidence I gathered before. It's enough to raise questions, but not enough to shut them down." Daniel's phone rang again. This time it was Mrs. Chen. He answered immediately. "Daniel, there are men here, men in suits. They say they're from Riverbend Security, that there's been a theft at the plant. They want to know where you are. Don't tell them anything. Is Tommy okay?" "He's scared, but they haven't touched him." "Daniel, what's going on?" "I can't explain now. Just take Tommy to your sister's house, the one in Portland. Don't tell anyone where you're going." "Daniel." "Please, Mrs. Chen, I'll explain everything later. Just keep Tommy safe." He hung up his hands, shaking. His son was in danger because of him, because of his choices. "This is my fault," Alexandra said quietly. "I should never have involved you." "No," Daniel said firmly. "This started long before you arrived. It started when they poisoned my wife, when they decided profit was worth more than lives. We're going to finish this." "How? We've lost the data. They know who we are. They have all the resources." "But they're scared," Daniel interrupted. "Hammond is terrified. You said so yourself. And those federal agents, they're already investigating. We just need to get them the right information, point them in the right direction." Alexandra was quiet for a moment, then pulled out a phone Daniel hadn't seen before, a burner probably. "I have a contact at the FBI, someone I trust. But if we go to them, we're putting ourselves completely in their hands. No going back." "There's already no going back," Daniel pointed out. "Make the call." As Alexandra dialed, Daniel looked out through the barn's broken windows at the lights of Haven's Grove in the distance. Somewhere in that town, his son was being hidden away by a kindly neighbor. Somewhere, Hammond was mobilizing his resources, preparing to crush anyone who threatened his empire. And somewhere in the ground beneath all of it, toxins continued to seep into the water supply, a slow-motion murder weapon that had been killing for 20 years. The call connected, and Alexandra started talking rapidly, explaining the situation. Daniel only half listened, his mind on Tommy, on Rachel, on all the families who didn't yet know they were being poisoned. Tomorrow the news would break. Tomorrow the fight would truly begin. But tonight, in this abandoned barn with corporate killers hunting them, Daniel made a promise to himself and to Rachel's memory, no matter what it cost him, no matter what he had to sacrifice. Riverbend Industries would pay for what they'd done. Victor Hammond thought he owned Haven's Grove, thought he could poison and murder with impunity. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Alexandra ended the call. "They're sending agents. They'll meet us at the state police barracks in Cascade Falls. We'll be in protective custody until this is over. And then we testify. We provide what evidence we have, and we hope it's enough." They got back in the stolen Honda, Alexandra driving again. As they headed toward Cascade Falls, Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen. "Safe in Portland with T. He's asking for you. Daniel typed back, "Tell him I love him. Tell him I'm making things right." The highway stretched ahead, dark and uncertain. Behind them, Havens Grove slept, unaware that its darkest secret was about to be exposed. The contaminated water still flowed, the mill still stood. Hammond still ruled his poisoned kingdom. But not for much longer. The federal agents were waiting at the state police barracks, grim-faced men and women who took their statements with professional detachment. Daniel told them everything, finding Alexandra. The meeting with Hammond, the murdered whistleblower, the plan to cause a catastrophic spill. Alexandra provided the USB drive with her original evidence. "It's enough to get warrants," the lead agent. A woman named Sarah Chen told them. "But we'll need more to make charges stick. Hammond has expensive lawyers, political connections. This is going to be a fight." "I'm ready," Daniel said. Agent Chen studied him. "You sure about that? Once we move on, this Hammond will throw everything he has at destroying you. Your reputation, your credibility, everything." Daniel thought of Rachel dying in a hospital bed, of Tommy innocent and trusting, of all the families in Havens Grove drinking poisoned water. "I'm sure," he said. As dawn broke over Oregon, federal agents prepared to raid Riverbend Industries. In a Portland hotel room, Tommy Hayes slept safely, unaware that his father was about to take on one of the most powerful men in the state. And in his executive office, Victor Hammond stood at his window, watching the sunrise, a glass of imported water in his hand. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd contained the threat. He had no idea what was coming. The war for Havens Grove was about to explode, and Daniel Hayes, mill worker, single father, ordinary man, was going to be at the center of it all. Rachel would have been proud. The motel room smelled of stale cigarettes and industrial disinfectant, but it was safe, and that was all that mattered. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, phone pressed to his ear, listening to Tommy's voice from Portland. "Dad, when are you coming to get me?" his son asked, and Daniel could hear the confusion, the fear barely held in check. "Soon, buddy. Just a few more days. Are you being good for Mrs. Chen?" "Yeah, but I don't understand why we had to leave. And why are there police cars outside?" Daniel closed his eyes. Agent Chen had arranged for protection for Tommy just in case Hammond's reach extended further than they anticipated. "It's just a precaution. Like wearing a seatbelt, remember, better safe than sorry." "Is this about Mom?" The question hit Daniel like a physical blow. "What makes you ask that?" "I heard Mrs. Chen talking to her sister. She said you were fighting the people who hurt Mom. Is that true?" 8 years old and already too perceptive for his own good. Rachel's intelligence shining through. "Yeah, buddy, it's true. The company I work for, they did some bad things. They hurt Mom and a lot of other people. I'm trying to stop them." "Are you gonna win?" Daniel looked across the room, where Alexandra was hunched over a laptop, one the FBI had provided, going through financial records with Agent Chen. 3 days had passed since their midnight flight from Havens Grove. 3 days of depositions, evidence review, and strategic planning. The raid on Riverbend had been postponed twice, Hammond's lawyers filing injunctions, calling in political favors, buying time. "I'm going to try my best," Daniel told his son. "That's all any of us can do." After saying goodbye to Tommy, Daniel joined Alexandra and Agent Chen at the small table that served as their makeshift command center. Chen was on her phone, her face grim. "Understood," she said, then hung up. "That was my supervisor. Hammond's lawyers just filed another motion. They're claiming the evidence was obtained illegally, that Ms. Novak essentially burglarized their facilities." "That's ridiculous," Alexandra protested. "I was investigating environmental crimes." "Without a warrant, without official EPA backing," Chen interrupted. "You were technically a private citizen engaged in corporate espionage. At least that's what they're arguing." Daniel felt the familiar sinking sensation that had become his constant companion. Every time they seemed to make progress, Hammond found another way to block them. "There is some good news," Chen continued. "The lab results came back on those water samples you collected, Ms. Novak. The contamination levels are off the charts. Benzene at 40 times the legal limit, formaldehyde at 60 times. It's enough to force an immediate health advisory." "When?" Alexandra asked. "Today. The EPA is issuing an emergency order advising all residents of Havens Grove and surrounding areas to stop using tap water immediately. Bottled water is being trucked in as we speak. Daniel thought of all the families who'd been drinking that water for years, decades even. It's too late for so many people. But not for everyone, Alexandra said, placing a hand on his arm. We're stopping it now. That matters. Chen's phone rang again. She answered, listened, and her expression shifted from professional to shocked. How many, Jesus Christ, we're on our way. She hung up and stood immediately. There's been an incident at Riverbend. The containment pond, the one they were planning to fail, it's breached. The spill is massive. Daniel was on his feet instantly. Hammond did it. He triggered it early. Maybe. Or maybe it failed naturally. Either way, hazmat teams are en route, but it's bad. Really bad. The contamination is flowing directly into Salmon Creek, which feeds the municipal water supply for 3 towns. Chen grabbed her jacket. I need you both to come with me. If this was deliberate, your testimony about the emails discussing this exact scenario becomes crucial. The drive back to Havens Grove took 2 hours, and with each mile the reality of the situation became clearer. Emergency vehicles screamed past them, heading the same direction. Radio reports spoke of evacuations of a toxic plume spreading downstream of fish dying by the thousands. As they crested the hill overlooking the valley, Daniel saw a black scar across the landscape where the containment pond had been. The breach had carved a canyon of poisoned earth, and at its end, Salmon Creek ran dark with contamination. The mill itself was surrounded by emergency vehicles, their lights creating a constellation of red and blue against the gray morning sky. My God, Alexandra whispered. It's worse than I imagined. Chen's phone hadn't stopped ringing. She coordinated with other agents, with EPA officials, with state police. Finally, she turned to them. Hammond's at the mill. He's in his office, refusing to leave, claiming he needs to coordinate the response. My guess is he's destroying evidence. Or planning his escape, Daniel added. They were waved through the security checkpoint, their FBI escort clearing the way. The mill grounds were chaos workers evacuating hazmat teams, setting up decontamination stations, news helicopters circling overhead. And in the middle of it all, the administrative building stood untouched, Hammond's office windows reflecting the disaster below. Stay close, Chen instructed as they entered the building. We have a warrant now. The spill gives us probable cause for immediate search and seizure. The executive floor was eerily quiet compared to the chaos outside. Margaret's desk was abandoned, her computer still on the USB device Daniel had planted, still wedged behind the monitor. He pocketed it quickly. No need for that particular piece of evidence to complicate things. Hammond's office door was locked. Chen knocked, announced herself, then nodded to one of her agents who produced a ram. The door flew open on the second strike. Victor Hammond stood at his window, still in yesterday's suit, a glass of whiskey in his hand despite the early hour. He didn't turn when they entered. 40 years, he said quietly. 40 years I've run this company, my father's company, my grandfather's company. Mr. Hammond, Chen began, you're under arrest for violations of the Clean Water Act, conspiracy to commit fraud, and suspicion of murder in the death of EPA whistleblower Michael Chen. Now Hammond turned and Daniel was shocked by his appearance. The polished CEO was gone. His eyes were bloodshot, his face haggard, his perfect composure shattered. Murder. Hammond laughed bitterly. I never ordered anyone killed. That was Victor's idea. Victor Slade, my head of security. He said Chen was going to destroy us, that we had to act. I told him to handle it, but I meant pay him off, not... He stopped, realizing he was confessing. Where's Victor Slade now? Chen asked. Gone. Disappeared last night when the pond breached. Probably halfway to a non-extradition country by now. Hammond took another sip of whiskey. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. The pond was supposed to hold for another 5 years, give us time to properly treat the waste. But the structure was weaker than we thought. 20 years of corrosive chemicals. You're saying the breach was an accident, Alexandra interrupted. Hammond's gaze fell on her, and for a moment his old arrogance flashed. This is all your fault. If you hadn't come snooping around stirring things up, if she hadn't investigated, people would have kept dying. Daniel said, stepping forward. My wife died because of your poison. How many others, Hammond? How many cancers? How many birth defects? How many deaths are on your hands? Hammond's facade cracked completely. You think I wanted this? You think I planned to poison people? It started small. A little corner cutting to save money, dumping some waste that was almost clean enough. Then the regulations got stricter, but the old waste was still there, seeping, spreading. We couldn't clean it up without admitting what we'd done. So we covered it up, and it got worse, and we covered that up too, and it spiraled. And when people started asking questions, you had them killed, Alexandra said coldly. I never... Hammond started, then stopped. Rachel Hayes, you asked about her earlier, Mr. Hayes. She came to me, you know, about 6 months before she got sick. Had water samples from the elementary school test results showing contamination. She was going to go public. Daniel's fists clenched. So you murdered her. I offered her money. A lot of money. Enough to move away, start over somewhere else. She refused. Hammond set down his glass, his hand shaking. I told Slade to handle it. I thought he'd threaten her, maybe arrange for you to be transferred to another town. I didn't know he was putting chemicals in her coffee at school. Didn't know until she was already dying, and it was too late. Daniel lunged forward, but Chen's agents caught him, held him back as he struggled against them. You knew, and you did nothing. I couldn't, Hammond shouted back. Don't you understand? I was trapped too. Slade had evidence of everything I'd done, every cover-up, every bribe. If I'd tried to stop him, he would have destroyed me. So you let him destroy others instead, Alexandra said with disgust. Chen stepped forward. Mr. Hammond, I'm going to read you your rights now. You have the right to remain silent. A gunshot cut through her words. Everyone ducked instinctively, but the shot hadn't been aimed at them. Hammond stood swaying a smoking pistol in his hand that he'd pulled from his desk drawer, blood spreading across his white shirt from the wound in his chest. No, Chen shouted, rushing forward as Hammond collapsed. Daniel watched in shock as agents called for medical assistance as Chen applied pressure to the wound, as Hammond's eyes flickered between consciousness and oblivion. The man who'd poisoned a town, who'd ordered deaths, who'd built an empire on toxic lies, was choosing his own way out. The files, Hammond gasped, blood bubbling on his lips. Hidden safe. Behind the painting, everything's there. Slade's operations, the real contamination data, the names of everyone involved. His eyes found Daniel. Your wife. I'm sorry. It wasn't supposed to. I never meant. His words faded as the paramedics arrived, loading him onto a gurney, rushing him toward the elevator. Chen was already directing agents to find the safe to secure all documents. Alexandra stood at the window looking down at the environmental disaster below. He's not going to make it, she said quietly. Daniel joined her, watching the hazmat teams work to contain the spreading contamination. Does it matter? Even if he lives, he'll spend the rest of his life in prison. It matters to the families of his victims. They deserve to see him face justice, not escape through death. Chen approached them, her shirt stained with Hammond's blood. We found the safe. He wasn't lying. Everything's there. 20 years of evidence. Victor Slade documented everything as insurance, and Hammond kept it all. We have enough to prosecute dozens of people to prove systematic murder and cover-ups. What about Slade? Daniel asked. APB is out. Borders are being watched. He won't get far. Chen paused. Mr. Hayes, there's something else. In Hammond's files, there's a whole section on your wife. Slade documented everything, the doses he gave her, how he masked it as naturally occurring cancer. It's horrible, but it's also proof. You can finally have justice for Rachel. Daniel felt tears burning his eyes. Justice. Such a small word for such an enormous absence. Rachel was still gone. Tommy still had no mother. All the evidence in the world wouldn't bring her back. Alexandra touched his shoulder gently. She would be proud of you, what you've done, the courage you've shown. Would she? Daniel asked bitterly. I put our son in danger. I made him a target. What kind of father does that? The kind who stands up to evil, Chen said firmly. The kind who refuses to let murderers prosper. Your son will understand that one day. He'll be proud too. Outside, more emergency vehicles arrived. The governors of Oregon and Washington were declaring states of emergency. The EPA was mobilizing the largest environmental cleanup effort in the region's history. Riverbend Industries was finished, its stock price plummeting, its assets being frozen. Daniel's phone rang. Mrs. Chen from Portland. Daniel, you need to see the news. It's everywhere. He found a television in the break room, Alexandra and Agent Chen following. Every channel showed the same images, the breached containment pond, the poisoned creek, the evacuation zones. But also Daniel's face, his story, his fight for justice. Someone had leaked his involvement to the media, and now he was being hailed as a hero, the whistleblower who'd risked everything to expose Riverbend's crimes. This changes things, Chen said. With this much public attention, witness protection might not be enough. You're going to need security media handlers. I don't want any of that, Daniel interrupted. I just want my son safe. I want to go home. Home to Havens Grove, Alexandra asked. After everything. Daniel thought about it. The town was poisoned literally and figuratively. The mill would close, hundreds would lose their jobs. The cleanup would take years, maybe decades. It would be easier to leave to start over somewhere else. But then he thought of the other families, the ones who couldn't afford to leave, the ones who would stay and fight to reclaim their town from the poison. They would need leaders, advocates, people who understood what had been done and were committed to making it right. Yes, he said finally. Havens Grove is our home. Rachel is buried there. We're not running away. The next hours blurred together. Hammond died on the operating table, his secrets dying with him, but his evidence living on. Victor Slade was captured at the Canadian border carrying fake passports and $2 million in cash. The FBI raided homes across Havens Grove, arresting doctors who'd falsified medical records, city officials who'd taken bribes, Riverbend executives who'd participated in the cover-up. By evening, Daniel was reunited with Tommy at a hotel in Portland. His son ran into his arms, holding on tight, and Daniel breathed in the scent of his hair, felt the solid warmth of him, the precious reality of this one good thing he'd managed to protect. Is it over, Dad? Tommy asked. The bad part is, Daniel told him, now we get to help fix things. Alexandra found them there, Tommy asleep in Daniel's arms, as the television played coverage of the ongoing crisis. She sat down beside them, exhausted, but somehow at peace. The EPA is offering me a permanent position, she said, leading the Havens Grove cleanup effort. It'll take years, but I want to see it through. Good, Daniel said. The town needs someone like you, someone who won't give up. What about you? The FBI says there's a substantial reward for whistleblowers in cases like this, enough to start over anywhere. Daniel looked down at his sleeping son. We're staying too. I've been thinking with the mill closing, people will need jobs, clean jobs. Maybe it's time to start something new. Solar panels, wind turbines, something that helps instead of hurts. Alexandra smiled. From sawmill supervisor to green energy entrepreneur. Why not? If the last week has taught me anything, it's that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they have to. She leaned against his shoulder and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the news coverage continue. Experts were calling it the worst environmental crime in Oregon history. The cleanup costs would run into the billions. Hundreds of families were filing lawsuits. The entire corporate structure that had controlled Havens Grove for generations was collapsing. But amid the destruction, Daniel saw hope. Volunteers organizing water distribution. Neighboring towns offering shelter to evacuees. Environmental groups mobilizing resources. The poison had been exposed and now the healing could begin. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. He almost didn't check it. Then curiosity won. The message was simple. Your wife would be proud. A friend. No signature, but attached was a photo. Daniel had never seen Rachel at a town council meeting, standing at the podium, clearly arguing passionately about something. The timestamp showed it was taken a week before she got sick. She'd been fighting even then, trying to protect the town, protect the children she taught. Who sent that? Alexandra asked. I don't know. Someone who knew Rachel, I guess. Someone who wants me to know she was fighting too. You both fought in different ways at different times, but for the same thing. For truth. For justice. For Tommy and all the other children who deserve to grow up without fear of being poisoned. Daniel saved the photo, adding it to his small collection of Rachel's pictures. Tomorrow, he would have to face the media, the lawyers, the endless questions. Tomorrow, the real work of rebuilding would begin. But tonight, holding his son, sitting with a woman who'd become an unexpected ally and friend, he allowed himself a moment of victory. Victor Hammond was dead. Victor Slade was in custody. Riverbend Industries was finished. The poison was exposed. The lies unraveled, the truth finally free. It had cost so much Rachel's life, years of suffering a town's innocence. But it was over. No, Daniel corrected himself. Not over. Changed. Havens Grove would never be the same, but maybe that was good. Maybe from the poisoned ground something better could grow. Something clean and honest and worthy of the people who'd suffered for so long. Tommy stirred in his sleep, mumbling something about superheroes. Daniel kissed his forehead gently. His son didn't need superheroes. He had something better, a father who'd stood up to monsters and won a community that would rebuild stronger than before, and the memory of a mother who'd started the fight that finally brought justice to Havens Grove. The news anchor was recapping the day's events, showing aerial footage of the contamination zone. It looked like a wound on the earth, ugly and raw. But wounds heal, Daniel thought. With time and care and determination, even the deepest wounds heal. Alexandra had fallen asleep too, her head on his shoulder, exhausted from days of tension and fear. Daniel sat awake, keeping watch over them both, these precious people who'd survived the storm together. Outside Portland glittered with lights untouched by Havens Grove's poison. But Daniel's heart remained in his broken town, already planning its resurrection. The war was won, but the peace would be harder. Cleaning the water, healing the land, rebuilding trust. It would take years, maybe a lifetime. But sitting there with his son safe in his arms and a brave woman beside him, Daniel knew they would do it. For Rachel, for all the victims, for the future. Havens Grove would rise again cleaner and stronger than before. And Daniel Hayes, ordinary man turned unlikely hero, would be there to help it happen. The poison had been exposed. Now it was time to heal. The diner on Main Street had become their unofficial headquarters in the weeks following Hammond's death. It was here over coffee that tasted like burnt rubber and pie that somehow made everything better that Daniel and Alexandra met with lawyers, EPA officials, and the steady stream of journalists who descended on Havens Grove like vultures circling a carcass. This morning was different. Victor Slade was being transported back to Havens Grove for his arraignment, and the entire town seemed to hold its breath. Daniel sat in their usual booth, watching through the window as protesters gathered outside the courthouse across the street. Some held signs with the names of loved ones who'd died from cancer. Others simply stood in silent witness, their presence more powerful than any words. 27 million, Alexandra said, setting down her phone. That's the initial cleanup estimate, and it's probably low. Tommy was back in school, a different school in the next town over, where the water was clean and parents didn't look at Daniel with a mixture of gratitude and resentment. Some blamed him for destroying the town's economy. Others treated him like a saint. Neither felt right. The lawyers called again, Daniel said, stirring sugar into his coffee. They want me to testify at Slade's trial, walk through everything from the beginning. You have to, Alexandra said. You're the key witness. Without your testimony. I know. He watched a family walk past the window, the parents carrying cases of bottled water, the children wearing masks against the chemical smell that still lingered in certain parts of town. I just wonder sometimes if we did the right thing. All these people losing their jobs, their homes, worthless because nobody wants to buy property in a poisoned town. Alexandra reached across the table and took his hand. Over the past weeks, their relationship had evolved from partnership to something deeper, though neither had put words to it yet. You gave them the truth. That's always the right thing. The diner door chimed, and Agent Chen entered, her expression grim. She'd been living in Havens Grove for weeks now, coordinating the federal response. She slid into the booth beside Alexandra. Slade's lawyer is trying to cut a deal, she said without preamble. Full cooperation in exchange for manslaughter instead of murder 1. Daniel's coffee cup hit the saucer hard enough to crack it. Manslaughter. He poisoned my wife over months. That's premeditated murder. His lawyer argues it was industrial negligence, not intentional homicide. Says Slade was just following Hammond's orders trying to protect the company. Chen's disgust was evident. The prosecutor is considering it because Slade has information about other contamination sites, other companies involved in the cover-up. It's bigger than just Havens Grove. How much bigger? Alexandra asked. 3 other mills in the Pacific Northwest. Same parent company, same practices. Hundreds of square miles of contaminated groundwater. Thousands of potential victims. Chen pulled out a folder. But here's the thing, Slade won't talk unless he gets the deal. And without his information, those other sites keep poisoning people. Daniel stood abruptly, needing to move to escape the suffocating weight of impossible choices. He walked to the window, watching the protesters across the street. An elderly woman held a photo of what looked like her son murdered by Riverbend written beneath it. What would Rachel want? He asked quietly. Alexandra joined him at the window. She'd want to save as many people as possible, even if it meant compromising on justice for herself. She was right, and Daniel hated it. Rachel had always been the pragmatist, the one who saw the bigger picture while he focused on immediate problems. It's what had made her such a good teacher. She thought about her students' futures, not just their present. There's something else, Chen said. Slade's lawyer provided a sample of what his client knows. Daniel, your wife, wasn't the only one. There's a list. 17 names over 20 years, people who asked questions, who threatened to expose the truth. All dead from various causes, cancer, car accidents, supposed suicides. Daniel turned back to face her. 17 people that we know of. Slade kept records insurance against Hammond turning on him. If we take the deal, all of that becomes evidence. Those families get answers, maybe some measure of justice. The diner had gone quiet around them. Millie, the owner, stood behind the counter, pretending to clean while obviously listening. Everyone in Havens Grove had become part of this story, willing or not. Daniel's phone buzzed. Mrs. Chen watching Tommy. Your boy's asking for you, says he needs to talk to you about something important. Go, Alexandra said. Chen and I can handle the lawyers for now. The drive to Mrs. Chen's temporary apartment took only 10 minutes, but it gave Daniel time to think. The town was transforming around him. Empty houses where families had fled. EPA containment zones wrapped in yellow tape. Construction crews installing water filtration systems that should have been there decades ago. Tommy was in the living room, his school backpack beside him, his face serious in a way that made him look older than his 8 years. Hey, buddy, Daniel said, sitting beside him. Mrs. Chen said you needed to talk. Tommy pulled out a folder from his backpack. We had to do a project about heroes. Everyone else picked Superman or Captain America. I picked you. Daniel opened the folder, his throat tightening. Tommy had drawn pictures Daniel at the mill, Daniel helping Alexandra. Daniel standing up to what Tommy had labeled the bad men. The last picture showed their family, including a ghostly outline of Rachel watching over them. My teacher says heroes always win, Tommy said quietly. But Mom still died. So did you really win? How did you explain moral complexity to an 8-year-old? How did you tell him that sometimes winning meant accepting losses, that justice and revenge weren't the same thing? That doing the right thing often felt like losing? Come here, Daniel said, pulling Tommy close. You know how in your video games sometimes you have to choose between saving one person or saving a whole city? Tommy nodded. Real life is like that sometimes. We stopped the bad men from hurting more people, but we couldn't undo what they'd already done. We couldn't bring Mom back. So did we win? I don't know. But we did what Mom would have wanted. We protected others. Is that why that lady is always around Alexandra, because she helped protect people? Daniel hesitated. He and Alexandra had been careful around Tommy, keeping their growing relationship professional in his presence. But kids saw everything. She's helping fix what the bad men broke, Daniel said carefully. She's very brave, like Mom was. Mom would like her, Tommy said matter-of-factly. She would want you to be happy. Before Daniel could respond, his phone rang. Chen's number. You need to get to the courthouse now, she said. Slade's being brought in, and he's asked to speak with you. Just you. Daniel's blood ran cold. Why? He says he has information about Rachel that only you should hear. The prosecutor's allowing it, but only if you're willing. Daniel looked at Tommy, so young, so vulnerable, already carrying scars that would last a lifetime. I'll be there. The courthouse was a circus. Media vans lined the street. Protesters pressed against police barriers. And in the middle of it all, a black SUV with federal plates sat waiting. Daniel was escorted through a side entrance down corridors that smelled of old wood and older secrets to a small conference room where Victor Slade waited in shackles. Daniel had expected a monster. Instead, he found a tired-looking man in his 60s, gray-haired ordinary. Slade could have been anyone's grandfather, anyone's neighbor. It made what he'd done even more horrifying. "Mr. Hayes," Slade said, his voice cultured, educated. "Thank you for coming." "Say what you have to say." Slade studied him for a moment. "Your wife came to me first, before she went to Hammond. She'd figured out what we were doing, had evidence. She offered me a deal she'd stay quiet if we cleaned up the water at the elementary school." Daniel's fists clenched. "You're lying." "I have the recording. She wore a wire, thought she was being clever. I knew, of course, but I let her talk. She was magnificent, actually. Passionate, intelligent, absolutely fearless. She reminded me of my own daughter." "You don't get to talk about her like that. You murdered her." "I did," Slade said simply. "And I've murdered 16 others over the years, but your wife was different. She was the only one who made me question what I was doing. The only one who made me feel guilty. Am I supposed to feel sorry for you?" "No. I'm trying to explain why I kept more detailed records of her case, why I documented everything so carefully." Slade leaned forward. "Hammond ordered me to kill her quickly, make it look like an accident. But I thought if I did it slowly with the chemicals, there might be a chance she'd give up, leave town, save herself. I gave her a dozen opportunities to run. She never took them." Daniel stood unable to sit across from this man any longer. "She was protecting her students. She would never abandon them." I know that now, but I need you to understand something, Mr. Hayes. Your wife's death wasn't just about silencing a whistleblower. Hammond had a personal stake in it. You see, the elementary school where she taught Hammond's grandson went there. When Rachel threatened to go public about the water contamination, Hammond saw it as a direct threat to his family. He wanted her eliminated immediately. His grandson was drinking the same poisoned water. Hammond had bottled water delivered to his family. They never touched the tap water. But if Rachel had gone public, the scandal would have destroyed his grandson's future, his family's reputation. In Hammond's mind, one teacher's life was worth less than his family's standing. The revelation shouldn't have surprised Daniel, but it did. The depth of Hammond's hypocrisy protecting his own while poisoning others was staggering. "There's more," Slade continued. "I have recordings of Hammond discussing your wife with other board members. They talked about you too, whether you were a threat. They decided you were too grief-stricken to be dangerous. They were wrong. Get to the point. The point is, I have evidence that could help you in civil court. Recordings documents proof that Riverbend deliberately targeted your wife. It's yours if you want it. No conditions." Daniel turned to face him. "Why?" "Because I'm going to prison for the rest of my life. Because 17 families deserve the truth. And because your wife was right about everything, and I was too much of a coward to admit it until now." Slade looked older, suddenly shrunken. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know that's impossible. I'm just trying to do one right thing before I'm locked away. One right thing doesn't erase 17 murders." "No, it doesn't, but it's all I have to offer." Daniel left without another word. Outside, the crowd had grown. Someone recognized him, and suddenly, reporters were shoving microphones in his face, shouting questions. He pushed through them, desperate for air, for space to think. Alexandra found him an hour later, sitting on Rachel's grave in the Havens Grove Cemetery. She sat beside him without speaking, understanding that sometimes silence was more comfort than words. "Slade offered me everything," Daniel finally said. "All the evidence about Rachel's murder, recordings, documents, proof of premeditation." "That's good, isn't it? It strengthens the case against him in Riverbend." "Is it Rachel's still dead? Having proof that they meant to kill her doesn't bring her back. It just adds details to the nightmare." Alexandra was quiet for a moment. "My father died when I was 15. Industrial accident, they said. Years later, I found out it was negligence cost-cutting measures that made the equipment unsafe. I spent months gathering evidence proving the company was at fault. You know what I learned?" Daniel looked at her, waiting. that justice and healing aren't the same thing. Justice is about accountability, making sure the guilty pay for their crimes. Healing is about learning to live with the loss, finding meaning in the pain. You can have justice without healing and healing without justice. But sometimes, if you're lucky, you can have both. How? By using your pain to prevent others from experiencing the same. By turning Rachel's death into the catalyst that saved hundreds of other lives. That's what you've done, Daniel. You've given her death meaning. They sat quietly as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The cemetery was peaceful, removed from the chaos consuming the rest of Haven's Grove. Here among the dead, there was a strange sense of completion. Daniel's phone buzzed. A text from Tommy. "Dad, are you okay? Mrs. Chen is making dinner. She says you should come eat." "I should go," Daniel said. Tommy needs stability, routine, normal things. "Normal is relative these days," Alexandra said. "But yes, go. Be with your son. I'll handle the lawyers." As Daniel stood to leave, he looked back at Rachel's headstone. "I'm taking the deal," he said. Not sure if he was talking to Alexandra or Rachel or himself. Slade provides information about all the murders, all the contamination sites in exchange for life without parole instead of the death penalty. It's not perfect justice, but it's the best we're going to get. Alexandra nodded. Rachel would understand. The drive back to town took him past the mill, or what was left of it. Demolition had begun on the contaminated sections. Heavy machinery tore apart buildings that had stood for generations, reducing them to rubble that would be carefully disposed of in hazardous waste facilities. It was like watching the town's history being erased one brick at a time. But alongside the destruction, there were signs of renewal. A new medical clinic funded by federal disaster relief. A water testing station where residents could check contamination levels. A memorial wall where people had started placing photos of loved ones lost to the poisoning. Daniel stopped at the memorial, looking at the faces. So many of them were young children, teenagers, young parents. All gone because a company decided profit was more important than lives. He found the spot where someone had placed Rachel's photo, her teacher ID picture where she was smiling full of life and purpose. Mr. Hayes. He turned to find a young woman, maybe 25, holding a baby. "I'm Sarah Morrison, Pete Morrison's daughter. You know my dad from the mill." Daniel nodded. Pete had been one of the good ones, always looking out for his workers. "I wanted to thank you," Sarah continued. "My dad's been sick for years. Lung problems the doctors couldn't explain. Now we know it was from the chemicals. He's getting treatment now, real treatment, because of what you exposed. I'm glad he's getting help. He's not the only one. My daughter here..." She adjusted the baby in her arms. "The doctors caught something in her blood work, early signs of contamination. We switched to bottled water immediately. You might have saved her life." Before Daniel could respond, Sarah leaned forward and kissed his cheek, then walked away quickly. Embarrassed by her own boldness, Daniel stood there stunned as more people approached. Not reporters this time, but residents. They didn't all speak, but they nodded. Touched his shoulder, made eye contact. A silent acknowledgement of shared pain and shared purpose. By the time he reached Mrs. Chen's apartment, dinner was cold, but Tommy didn't care. He chattered about school, about his friends, about everything except the reason they were living in someone else's home. It was his way of coping, pretending normalcy until it became real. After Tommy went to bed, Daniel sat with Mrs. Chen, the woman who'd become an unexpected anchor in their storm-tossed life. "You're a good man, Daniel Hayes," she said, pouring tea. "Your wife would be proud. Everyone keeps saying that. Because it's true. You could have stayed silent, kept your job, protected yourself. Instead, you risked everything for the truth. That takes courage most people don't have. Or stupidity. Sometimes they're the same thing." Mrs. Chen smiled. "The smart thing and the right thing aren't always aligned. You chose right over smart. That's what makes you good." Later, Daniel stood on the balcony looking out over Haven's Grove. The town was quiet, but it was the quiet of exhaustion, not peace. Tomorrow, Slade would formally accept the plea deal. The other contamination sites would be revealed. More towns would learn they'd been poisoned. The ripples would spread further. His phone rang. "Alexandra." "Can't sleep either," she asked. Too much to process. I have news. The EPA is establishing a permanent office here. They want me to run it, oversee the long-term cleanup and monitoring. It means I'll be staying in Havens Grove for at least 5 years, maybe longer. Daniel felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he hadn't realized he was carrying. That's good news. The town needs consistency, someone they can trust. What about you? Any thoughts on what comes next? He'd been avoiding the question for weeks. The insurance settlement from Rachel's death combined with the whistleblower reward meant he didn't have to work for a while. But Tommy needed stability, needed to see his father moving forward, not just treading water. I've been thinking about what you said about giving Rachel's death meaning. There are going to be a lot of sick people in this town, people who need advocates, someone who understands the system, the cover-ups, the tactics these companies use. You want to become an advocate? Maybe. Or maybe I'll help other whistleblowers, people who know about corporate crimes but are too scared to come forward. I know what that fear feels like, and I know what it takes to overcome it. The whistleblower's advocate, Alexandra said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. Rachel would love that. They talked for another hour about practical things and impossible dreams about Tommy and the town and the future they were slowly building from the ruins of the past. When they finally said goodnight, Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced since Rachel's death hope. The next morning brought chaos. Slade's plea deal had leaked and the media descended again, but this time Daniel was ready. He stood on the courthouse steps, Tommy beside him against all advice, but the boy had insisted and faced the cameras. Victor Slade murdered my wife, he said simply. He murdered 16 other people. He should face the death penalty. But if accepting this deal means exposing other contamination sites, saving other lives, then I support it. Not because Slade deserves mercy, but because other families deserve protection. Mr. Hayes, a reporter shouted, do you forgive Victor Slade? Daniel looked at Tommy, then back at the cameras. No. Some things are unforgivable. But this isn't about forgiveness. It's about prevention. It's about making sure no other 8-year-old loses their mother to corporate greed. What's next for you and your son? Healing, rebuilding, making sure Havens Grove becomes a symbol not of corporate crime, but of community resilience. This town was poisoned, but it's not dead. We're going to prove that. Inside the courthouse, Slade formally accepted the plea deal. He provided locations of contamination sites in Washington, Idaho, and California. He named names, provided documents, became the key that unlocked a massive federal investigation into industrial poisoning across the Pacific Northwest. Daniel didn't stay to watch. He'd seen enough of Victor Slade. Instead, he took Tommy to the river upstream from the contamination where the water still ran clear. They skipped stones and talked about nothing important, just a father and son trying to find normal moments in an abnormal time. Dad, Tommy said eventually, are we going to be okay? Daniel pulled his son close, looking at the water that had once been pure, would be pure again someday with enough time and effort. Yeah, buddy, we're going to be okay. Different than before, maybe sadder in some ways, but okay. And Alexandra, is she going to be part of our okay? Daniel thought about the woman who'd entered their lives tied to a tree, who'd become his partner in justice, his friend in grief, and maybe something more given time. Would that be all right with you? Tommy considered this seriously. Mom would want us to be happy, and Alexandra makes you less sad. So, yeah, it's all right. That evening, the three of them had dinner together for the first time as something approaching a family, not replacing what was lost, but building something new from the ashes. They talked about Tommy's school, about Alexandra's cleanup plans, about Daniel's ideas for helping other whistleblowers. Outside Havens Grove continued its transformation. Demolition and construction, poison and purification, death and rebirth. The town would never be what it was, but it could become something better, a place where truth mattered more than profit, where courage was valued over comfort, where the water would run clean because people had fought to make it so. Daniel looked at the photo of Rachel he kept on the mantle, her smile frozen in time before the poison took her. He'd honored her memory the only way he knew how, by finishing what she'd started, by protecting the children she'd died trying to save. The war was over, but the rebuilding had just begun. And Daniel Hayes, widower, father unlikely, hero, was ready for whatever came next. 6 months had passed since Slade's conviction, and Haven's Grove wore its scars like badges of honor. The mill's skeleton still dominated the skyline, but now it was wrapped in scaffolding as crews worked to transform it into something unprecedented, a water treatment facility that would become the most advanced in the nation. Daniel stood at the construction site's fence watching welders work where he'd once supervised the saw line, their sparks falling like stars in the morning light. "The irony isn't lost on you, is it?" Alexandra asked, joining him with 2 cups of coffee from the vendor who'd set up shop to serve the construction crews. The place that poisoned the water becoming the place that cleans it. "Rachel would have appreciated it," Daniel said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "She always said the best redemption stories were the ones where the villain's weapons became the hero's tools." They stood in comfortable silence, a rhythm they'd developed over months of shared purpose. Their relationship had evolved slowly. Carefully, both of them aware of Tommy's watchful eyes and the ghost of Rachel that would always be part of their story. They hadn't put a label on what they were to each other, but the town had begun referring to them as a couple, and neither had corrected the assumption. "The memorial dedication is tomorrow," Alexandra reminded him. "Are you ready for your speech?" Tomorrow marked 1 year since the night Daniel had found her tied to that tree. The town had chosen the date to dedicate the Rachel Hayes Memorial Water Center, the new facility's official name. It had been the town council's idea, not Daniel's, but he'd been moved by the gesture. "I've written it 12 times, he admitted. "Nothing seems adequate." "It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be true." Before Daniel could respond, his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but he'd learned to answer every call. His work as an advocate for other whistleblowers had brought him into contact with people from across the country, all with stories of corporate crimes they were afraid to expose. "Mr. Hayes, this is Margaret Stern. I was Victor Hammond's secretary." Daniel stiffened. Margaret had disappeared the day of the raid, and the FBI had been looking for her ever since. "Ms. Stern, where are you?" "That doesn't matter. I'm calling because there's something you need to know, something about your wife that wasn't in Slade's files." "What about her?" There was a long pause. "She wasn't the first teacher from that school to get sick. 3 others developed cancer in the 5 years before her. All young women, all healthy before. Hammond knew about the pattern. He had a study done privately. The contamination levels at the school were 10 times higher than anywhere else in town." Daniel gripped the phone tighter. "Why?" "The school was built on an old riverbend disposal site, officially cleaned up in the 1980s, but the cleanup was cosmetic. The chemicals were still there, seeping up through the ground. Hammond knew the school board knew, but fixing it would have cost millions and admitted liability." "You're saying they deliberately kept a school open on poisoned ground?" "For 20 years. Your wife figured it out. She found the old survey maps, connected the dots. That's why they had to silence her. She could have proven deliberate endangerment of children." "Where's this proof now?" "I have it. I've had it all along. Hammond made me keep copies of everything his insurance policy, but I also kept my own insurance." She paused again. "I'm dying, Mr. Hayes. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors say I have weeks, maybe a month. I want to make things right before I go. Tell me where you are. The FBI can protect you." "No. I'll send you everything, documents, recordings, the private study about the school. Use it however you think best, but I have one condition." "What?" "There's a girl, Emma Watson. She's 12 now. She was in your wife's 3rd grade class. She has leukemia diagnosed last year. Her family can't afford the experimental treatment that might save her. The standard treatment isn't working." Daniel knew Emma. Rachel had loved her, called her the brightest student she'd ever taught. "What about her I want my remaining money to go to her treatment, all of it. I have about $200,000 saved blood money from 20 years of helping Hammond cover up his crimes. Maybe saving one child can begin to atone for all the ones I helped poison." "Margaret, please, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I typed the memos that ordered increased dumping. I scheduled the meetings where they planned cover-ups. I stood by while people died. But maybe I can save one life before I lose my own." Daniel looked at Alexandra, who had been listening to his side of the conversation with growing concern. "Send me everything. I'll make sure Emma gets the treatment. Thank you. And Mr. Hayes." Your wife came to see me once about a month before she got sick. She asked me how I could work for a man like Hammond knowing what he was doing. I told her I was just a secretary, just following orders. She said something I have never forgotten: evil triumphs when good people convince themselves they're powerless. She was right. I had power. I just chose not to use it. The line went dead. Daniel stood there processing this new information, another layer of horror in an already horrific story. What did she want? Alexandra asked. Daniel explained, watching Alexandra's face shift from surprise to anger to deep sadness. The school, she said finally. We need to test every child who attended in the last 20 years. Every teacher, every staff member. That's hundreds of people. Then we test hundreds of people. She was already pulling out her phone, calling her EPA team. We'll need mobile units, pediatric specialists. As she coordinated the response, Daniel thought about Rachel spending her days in that poisoned school, breathing in chemicals, with every breath unknowingly dying while trying to educate the next generation. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. His phone buzzed. An encrypted email from an address he didn't recognize, with attachments, dozens of them. Daniel opened the first document, and there it was in black and white: Confidential Environmental Assessment, Havens Grove Elementary School, commissioned by Riverbend Industries. The report detailed contamination levels that should have closed the school immediately: benzene concentrations in the playground soil, formaldehyde in the air ducts, heavy metals in the water fountains, and at the bottom, Hammond's signature approving a recommendation to maintain current operations while monitoring health impacts. They'd turned the school into a laboratory, the children and teachers into test subjects. Daniel forwarded everything to Agent Chen, the FBI, the EPA, and 3 major news outlets. Within an hour, his phone was ringing non-stop. By evening, Havens Grove Elementary was surrounded by news vans, and parents were demanding answers. The emergency town meeting that night was standing room only. Parents filled every seat, lined the walls, spilled out into the hallway. Daniel sat in the front row with Alexandra and Tommy, who'd insisted on coming. I went to that school, Tommy had said. My friends go there. I need to be there. The mayor, a Hammond appointee who'd somehow survived the political purge, tried to maintain order, but the crowd was beyond containment. Parents shouted questions, demanded immediate testing, threatened lawsuits. Please, the mayor said, his voice cracking. We're arranging testing for everyone. The school will remain closed until when? Shouted a father from the back. Until you're sure our kids are dying. My daughter has had headaches for 2 years. The doctors said it was stress. Was it stress or was it poison? Daniel stood, and the room gradually quieted. His role as the man who'd exposed Riverbend gave him an authority he'd never sought but couldn't avoid. I know you're angry, he said. You have every right to be. My wife taught at that school for 6 years. She died because of it. But anger alone won't help our children. We need organized action. What do you suggest? A mother asked. First, immediate testing for every child and adult who spent significant time at the school in the last 20 years. Second, a fund for medical treatment for anyone affected. Riverbend's assets are frozen, but the federal government has emergency health funds available. Third, a complete environmental assessment of every public building in Havens Grove. No more surprises. Who's going to pay for all this? The mayor asked. We are, said a voice from the back. Everyone turned to see a man in an expensive suit standing in the doorway. My name is James Morrison. I represent a coalition of insurance companies that covered Riverbend Industries. We've been monitoring the situation, and given the new evidence Mr. Hayes has provided, we're prepared to establish a $100 million health fund for Havens Grove residents. The room erupted. The mayor tried to restore order, but people were already mobbing Morrison with questions. Daniel felt Alexandra's hand slip into his, a public acknowledgement of their relationship that would have been news in itself on any other day. You did this, she whispered. Margaret Stern's documents will save lives. Rachel did this, Daniel corrected. She started the fight. We're just finishing it. The next morning, the day of the memorial dedication, Daniel woke to find Tommy already dressed in his best clothes, the ones they'd bought for the court hearings. The boy was growing so fast, already needing new shoes. You okay, buddy? Daniel asked. Mom would be happy today, right? Her name on the building, everyone remembering her. She'd be embarrassed by the attention, but happy about the purpose. She never wanted fame just to make a difference. She did both, Tommy said simply. The dedication ceremony was held at the construction site. A temporary stage had been erected where the old executive parking lot had been. The crowd was enormous, not just Havens Grove residents, but people from across the state who'd been following the story. Environmental activists, other whistleblowers, families affected by corporate poisoning in other towns. Alexandra spoke first in her capacity as EPA Regional Director, outlining the cleanup progress and the revolutionary purification technology the new facility would employ. Then the mayor, then Agent Chen, then several other officials. Finally, it was Daniel's turn. He stood at the podium looking out at the sea of faces. In the front row sat Tommy with Mrs. Chen. Behind them he spotted Emma Watson in a wheelchair, thin from chemo, but smiling. Her parents had tears in their eyes. They'd received word that morning that Margaret Stern's money had been transferred, that Emma would start the experimental treatment next week. Rachel Hayes was a teacher, Daniel began. Not an activist, not a crusader, just a teacher who loved her students. When she discovered they were being poisoned, she did what any good teacher would do. She tried to protect them. It cost her life. He paused, seeing many in the crowd wiping their eyes. But her death was not in vain. Because of her initial investigation, because of the questions she asked and the evidence she gathered, we discovered a crime that had been hidden for 20 years. Hundreds of people who might have died from unexplained cancers now know the cause and can get proper treatment. Children who would have been poisoned are now safe. Daniel looked at the construction site behind him. This water treatment center will use technology that didn't exist when Riverbend was dumping chemicals. It will not just clean our water, but will become a model for communities across the country. It will stand as proof that from the worst corporate crimes can come the strongest community responses. He pulled out a photo of Rachel, the one from her last Christmas, showing it to the crowd. My wife believed in the power of education. She believed that knowledge could overcome ignorance, that truth could defeat lies, that courage could conquer fear. She was right. Every whistleblower who comes forward proves she was right. Every community that demands accountability proves she was right. Every child who grows up drinking clean water because of what we've done here proves she was right. The applause was thunderous, but Daniel wasn't finished. There's something else. This morning, I received word that the Rachel Hayes Foundation has been established with an initial endowment of $50 million from the insurance settlement. This foundation will provide legal support for whistleblowers' medical treatment for pollution victims and environmental education for schools across the country. Rachel was one teacher who made a difference. This foundation will help create thousands more. The crowd rose to its feet. Daniel saw Alexandra wiping tears. Tommy standing proud, Emma Watson struggling to her feet despite her weakness to applaud. This was Rachel's true memorial, not just a building, but a movement. After the ceremony, as people toured the construction site and signed up to volunteer for various initiatives, Daniel found himself standing with Alexandra and Tommy at a spot overlooking the river. The water ran clearer now, though it would take years before it was truly clean. So what now? Alexandra asked. You've exposed the crime, gotten justice, created a foundation. What does Daniel Hayes do next? Daniel thought about it. He'd received job offers from environmental groups, law firms, even a book deal. But none of it felt right. There's a man in Michigan, he said. Called yesterday. Says his company is dumping chemicals into Lake Superior. He's scared his family doesn't know what to do. I told him I'd fly out next week, help him document everything, protect him through the process. Another whistleblower case. Another chance to stop a crime before more people die. It's what Rachel would do, teach by example, show people they're not powerless. Tommy tugged on his sleeve. Dad, can I talk to Alexandra alone for a minute? Surprised. Daniel stepped away, watching as his son spoke earnestly to Alexandra. He saw her eyes widen, then fill with tears, then she hugged Tommy tightly. When they returned, both were smiling. What was that about? Daniel asked. Man stuff, Tommy said seriously. Private. That evening, at the reception held in the community center, Daniel was approached by an elderly woman he didn't recognize. Mr. Hayes, I'm Dorothy Chen, no relation to your neighbor. I taught with Rachel at the elementary school. I retired 5 years ago, just before she started. Nice to meet you. I wanted you to know something. The day before Rachel got sick, she came to see me. She'd figured out about the contamination, had all this evidence. She asked me what she should do. I told her to be careful, that fighting Riverbend was dangerous. Dorothy's voice broke. She said something I'll never forget. She said, "If I don't fight for these children, who will? If I stay silent to protect myself, how am I any different from the people poisoning them?" Then she hugged me and said, "Whatever happens, make sure Daniel knows I love him and Tommy more than life itself. But some things are worth the risk." Daniel couldn't speak. This was new, a message from Rachel he'd never received. "I should have told you sooner," Dorothy continued. "I was afraid even after everything came out. But seeing you today, seeing what you've accomplished, Rachel knew Mr. Hayes. She knew the risk she was taking, and she took it anyway. For the children, for the town, for the future. She was the bravest person I ever knew." As Dorothy walked away, Alexandra appeared at Daniel's side. "You okay?" "She knew," Daniel said wonderingly. "Rachel knew what might happen, and she did it anyway. That's who she was. That's who you fell in love with. And that's who Tommy will remember, not a victim, but a hero who chose to fight despite the danger." Later that night, after Tommy was asleep and the town had finally quieted, Daniel and Alexandra sat on the porch of the house he'd started renting on the clean side of town. The stars were visible here, away from the industrial lights that had dominated the sky near the mill. "Tommy asked me something today," Alexandra said, "during our private conversation." "What?" "He asked if I loved you, said he needed to know because he was thinking of asking you to marry me on his behalf." Daniel's heart stopped. "What did you tell him?" "The truth, that I do love you, that I have for months, but that it's complicated because I'll never try to replace Rachel, and I know part of your heart will always belong to her." Daniel took her hand. "Rachel's gone, but you're right, part of me will always love her. But I've learned something this year. The heart isn't a container that runs out of space. It expands. Loving you doesn't diminish what I had with Rachel. It honors it by proving I can still hope, still trust, still build a future worth living." Is that a proposal? That's Tommy's job, apparently. This is just a declaration. They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and built something beautiful from the wreckage. Tomorrow, Daniel would fly to Michigan to help another whistleblower. Alexandra would continue overseeing the cleanup. Tommy would go to school in a building that had been tested and declared safe. The work would continue. Other river bends would be exposed. Other Hammonds would fall. Other communities would discover they'd been poisoned and would fight back. The Rachel Hayes Foundation would help them all. But tonight, Daniel allowed himself this moment of peace. He'd kept his promise to Rachel, he'd protected Tommy, exposed the truth, and helped save the town she'd loved. The water would run clean again. Children would grow up healthy. The Memorial Center would stand as testament to what one person's courage could achieve. His phone buzzed with a text from the whistleblower in Michigan. "Thank you for agreeing to help. I'm terrified but ready. My kids deserve clean water too." Daniel showed it to Alexandra. Another beginning. Another chance to make a difference. "Think Rachel would approve?" Alexandra smiled. "I think Rachel would be packing your suitcase and researching Michigan environmental law. She'd probably also remind you to take Tommy to school before you leave and to remember to eat something besides airport food." She was right. Rachel would be practical even in her posthumous blessing. That was who she'd been, a woman who saw what needed to be done and did it regardless of the cost. The wind picked up, rustling through the trees that were slowly recovering from years of chemical exposure. Somewhere in that wind, Daniel could almost hear Rachel's voice, not speaking words, but carrying a feeling, pride, love, and most of all, peace. She'd started a war she couldn't finish, but she'd chosen her warrior well. Daniel pulled Alexandra closer, feeling Tommy's presence in the house behind them. Rachel's memory in the stars above, and the future spreading out before them like the river that would someday run clear and clean and safe again. The fight against Riverbend was over. The fight for clean water, for corporate accountability, for the safety of children who couldn't protect themselves, that fight would continue. And Daniel Hayes, widower, father, accidental hero, would be on the front lines carrying Rachel's courage forward. One whistleblower, one poisoned town, one saved life at a time. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Tonight brought something rarer and more precious hope that from the deepest tragedy could come the most profound triumph. Havens Grove would heal. Tommy would thrive. And somewhere in a better place than this poisoned earth, Rachel Hayes would know that her sacrifice had meant everything. The water would run clean again. That was the promise, the purpose, the point of it all. And with that thought, Daniel Hayes finally found what had eluded him for so long. Not closure, which suggested an ending, but continuity, which promised that Rachel's fight would go on as long as there were people brave enough to speak truth to power. The first battle was won. The war for clean water, for children's safety, for truth over profit. That war was just beginning. The call came at 3 a.m. 2 years after the memorial dedication. Daniel was in Seattle, having just helped expose a pharmaceutical company dumping expired medications into Puget Sound. Alexandra answered his phone, her voice thick with sleep, until she heard the voice on the other end. Daniel needs to come home, now. It was Agent Chen, and something in her tone made Alexandra's blood run cold. What's happened? Victor Slade is dead, murdered in federal prison. But before he died, he managed to send a message. There's something else about Havens Grove, something we missed, something still active. Daniel was on the first flight back, his mind racing. Slade had been serving life without parole, held in maximum security. Whoever killed him had reached into the heart of the federal prison system. Tommy, now 10 and tall for his age, was waiting at the airport with Alexandra. He'd grown serious beyond his years, shaped by loss, but not broken by it. He hugged his father tightly. Agent Chen said we might be in danger, Tommy said quietly. Is it true? Daniel looked at Alexandra over his son's head. Her expression told him everything. This was real, and it was serious. The FBI safe house was a farmhouse 20 miles outside Havens Grove, surrounded by federal agents. Chen was waiting in what had been converted into a command center, her face grim. On the table was a single piece of paper stained with what looked like blood. Slade managed to write this before he died, Chen explained. Guards found him this morning. Professional hit, single strike to the heart, no evidence of who did it. Daniel read the message, his hands beginning to shake. Hayes. Haven't told everything. Hammond had partners, the network, 7 companies, 7 towns. Haven was the test. They're moving to phase 2. Check the children born after 2015. Check their blood. Genesis protocol. They know about Tommy. Protect. The message ended in a spray of blood. Genesis protocol? Daniel asked. We've been searching databases all day, Chen said. Nothing official, but we found fragments in Hammond's encrypted files we just cracked. References to genetic modification through environmental exposure. Daniel, we need to test Tommy and every child in Havens Grove born after the contamination started. Alexandra grabbed Daniel's arm. You're not saying what I think you're saying. We found medical records, Chen continued, hidden in shell companies. 43 children in Havens Grove show unusual genetic markers. Enhanced immune systems, increased cognitive function, resistance to certain diseases. Tommy is one of them. Daniel felt the world tilt. They were experimenting on our children. Not experimenting, selecting. The contamination was designed to kill the weak and transform the strong. Hammond wasn't just poisoning people, he was conducting the largest unauthorized genetic modification trial in history. Tommy, who had been listening from the doorway despite being told to wait outside, stepped forward. Is that why I never get sick? Why I can remember everything I read? Daniel pulled his son close. We don't know anything for certain yet. But Chen's expression said otherwise. She pulled up files on her laptop, brain scans, blood work, genetic analyses, all showing the same pattern in dozens of Havens Grove children. There's more, Chen said. The 7 companies Slade mentioned, we've identified them. BioCorp in Montana, Genesis Labs in Wyoming, Titan Industries in Idaho, all running similar operations, all creating these enhanced children. For what purpose? Alexandra demanded. We don't know, but someone killed Slade to keep him from telling us. And according to our intelligence representatives from all 7 companies are converging on Havens Grove tomorrow. Daniel stood pacing to the window. Outside, federal agents patrolled the perimeter. His son, his brilliant, resilient son, was part of some corporate genetic experiment. Rachel had died trying to protect children who were being deliberately evolved. The water treatment center, he said suddenly. We built it on the old contamination site. What if there's something there? Something Hammond left behind. Chen was already pulling up blueprints. There are sections of the old mill basement we haven't excavated. Too dangerous, too contaminated. Or too important to let anyone find, Alexandra added. The next morning, wearing hazmat suits and accompanied by a federal tactical team, they entered the sealed basement of the old Riverbend mill. What they found defied comprehension. It was a laboratory pristine and advanced, hidden beneath decades of industrial camouflage. Computers hummed with power from an independent generator. Refrigeration units contained thousands of samples, blood tissue, DNA. My God, Alexandra breathed, reading the labels. These go back 30 years. They've been collecting genetic material from the entire town. Daniel found a terminal that was still active. The password prompt stared at him until Tommy, who had been forbidden to come but snuck in anyway, typed Genesis. Yes, the screen came alive with data. Project Genesis directed evolution through environmental selection. The files detailed everything, the deliberate contamination, the genetic markers. They were tracking the children they were monitoring. Dad, Tommy said, pointing at a file labeled Prime Subjects. His name was there along with 42 others. Each had detailed medical histories, psychological profiles, academic records. They'd been watched their entire lives. Here, Chen called from another terminal. Phase 2 implementation schedule. It's supposed to begin today. An alarm suddenly blazed through the facility. Security monitors showed vehicles approaching black SUVs, dozens of them. Not federal plates. We need to go, Chen commanded. Now. But it was too late. The exits were blocked. Men in tactical gear poured in, but they didn't fire. Instead, a woman in an expensive suit walked through their ranks perfectly calm. Mr. Hayes, she said. I'm Dr. Victoria Ash, director of the Genesis Collective. We've been waiting for you to find this place. You're under arrest, Chen said, raising her weapon. Dr. Ash smiled. I don't think so. Check with your superiors, Agent Chen. You'll find this operation has federal approval at the highest levels. National security, they'll tell you. The future of human evolution. Chen's phone rang. She listened, her face paling. Stand down, she told her team. Everyone stand down. What? Daniel couldn't believe it. Those are my orders. From the director himself, this operation is classified above my clearance level. Dr. Ash approached Tommy, who stood frozen beside his father. You're even more remarkable than we hoped, Tommy. Your mother's exposure created the perfect genetic conditions. You and the others like you are the future of our species. Enhanced intelligence, disease resistance, extended lifespan. You're not victims, you're victories. You murdered my mother, Daniel snarled, stepping between them. Rachel Hayes was a casualty of progress. Regrettable, but necessary. Though if it helps her genetic contribution through, Tommy will benefit millions in the future. You're insane. I'm a visionary. Climate change, pandemics, ecological collapse, humanity needs to evolve to survive. Natural selection is too slow. We're accelerating it. Havens Grove was our proof of concept. Now we're ready for global implementation. She pulled out a tablet showing a map. 7 cities glowed red. Within 5 years, controlled contamination zones in strategic locations. Within 20 years, a new generation of enhanced humans capable of surviving what's coming. Genocide, Alexandra said. You're talking about genocide. Evolution. The weak die so the strong can thrive. It's nature's way, we're just helping it along. Tommy stepped forward, surprising everyone. You're wrong. Dr. Ash looked amused. Oh, my mom didn't die so you could play God. She died protecting kids who didn't ask to be experiments. And my dad exposed you, not because he wanted to evolution or whatever, but because he wanted clean water. You think you're creating something better, but you're just murderers with fancy words. The boy's words hung in the air. Dr. Ash's smile faltered for a moment. Naive child. You'll understand when you're older. when you see what you're capable of. I already know what I'm capable of, Tommy said. I can choose. That's what makes us human, not enhanced genes or special abilities, choice, and I choose to stop you. Before anyone could react, Tommy grabbed a fire extinguisher and smashed it into the main computer terminal. Sparks flew, systems crashed, alarms blared. In the chaos, Daniel grabbed his son and ran. The next hours were a blur. The federal protection, it turned out, only extended to the Genesis Collective's facilities. Once outside, they were fair game. Daniel, Alexandra, Tommy, and Chen, who had defied orders to help them, fled through the Oregon forest pursued by corporate mercenaries. They holed up in an abandoned ranger station as night fell. Tommy was working on Chen's laptop, his enhanced intelligence allowing him to process code at superhuman speeds. I downloaded everything before I destroyed the terminal, he explained. All their data, all their plans. We can expose them. It won't matter, Chen said. They have federal protection, national security classification. Then we go public, Daniel said. Every news outlet, every social media platform, every whistleblower organization in the world. Make it impossible to suppress. Alexandra was studying the files Tommy had downloaded. Wait. Look at this. The other 6 companies, they're all publicly traded. If we expose this, their stock will crash. The investors will panic. The investors don't know, Daniel asked. According to these communications, only the top executives know the full scope. Everyone else thinks they're doing legitimate research. A plan formed. Over the next 12 hours, using satellite internet and encrypted communications, they orchestrated the largest simultaneous data dump in corporate history. Tommy, with his enhanced abilities, coordinated with hackers and journalists worldwide. Alexandra contacted environmental groups and health organizations. Chen reached out to honest agents within the FBI who were horrified by what their superiors had authorized. Daniel recorded a video message standing in the ranger station with dawn light streaming through broken windows. My name is Daniel Hayes. 2 years ago, I exposed Riverbend Industries for poisoning Havens Grove. Today, I'm exposing something worse. 7 companies have been deliberately contaminating water supplies to conduct illegal genetic experiments on children. They call it the Genesis Protocol. They call it evolution. I call it mass murder. He held up the documentation. Every parent in America needs to test their children's DNA. Every investor needs to demand answers. Every citizen needs to ask why our government approved using our children as lab rats. The video went viral within hours. Genesis. Protocol began trending worldwide. Stock markets opened to chaos as the 7 companies' shares plummeted. Parents marched on EPA offices demanding testing. International health organizations called for investigations. Dr. Ash made one last attempt to stop them. She appeared at the ranger station with a small team no longer hiding behind federal protection that was rapidly evaporating under public pressure. You've doomed humanity, she said. Without directed evolution, our species won't survive the coming challenges. Maybe not, Daniel replied. But we'll face them as humans, not as your engineered slaves. The enhanced children will suffer without our guidance. They need specialized medical care, psychological support. Then provide it, Alexandra interrupted. Create treatment programs, support networks. Help them without controlling them. Dr. Ash laughed bitterly. You think this ends with exposure. The Genesis Collective has resources you can't imagine. We'll go underground if necessary. Evolution doesn't stop because of bad publicity. No, Tommy said, stepping forward. But it does stop when the evolved choose differently. Every enhanced kid you created has free will. We can choose to reject your vision, and we will. As federal agents, real ones sent by an attorney general furious at being kept in the dark, arrived to arrest Dr. Ash. She looked at Tommy one last time. You could have been a god. I'd rather be human, Tommy replied. The aftermath was swift and decisive. The Genesis Collective's leadership was arrested. The 7 companies were seized by federal authorities. Massive class action lawsuits were filed. A national testing program identified 300 enhanced children across the country, all of whom were offered medical support and monitoring without coercion. Daniel established the Haven Protocol, named for the town that had suffered first and fought back hardest. It became the global standard for protecting communities from corporate environmental crimes. Tommy, despite his enhancements, chose to live a normal life, using his abilities to help other victims of corporate experimentation. 3 months later, at Rachel's grave, Daniel stood with Alexandra and Tommy. They'd just learned Alexandra was pregnant, a child conceived in love, not engineered in a lab. "Think Mom would understand?" Tommy asked. "What I am, what they made me." "She'd love you exactly as you are," Daniel said. "Enhanced or not, you're her son. You're the best of her courage, her compassion, her refusal to accept injustice. And you're the best of your father too," Alexandra added. "His determination, his integrity, his ability to stand up when everyone else would stay down." Tommy smiled, that rare, bright smile that reminded Daniel so much of Rachel. "So I'm genetically enhanced and emotionally enhanced. Double winner." They laughed, standing together in the cemetery where so many victims of Havens Grove's poisoning lay, but also where heroes rested, Rachel foremost among them. "We should go," Alexandra said. "The congressional hearing is tomorrow." Daniel was testifying before Congress about corporate environmental crimes, pushing for legislation that would make another Genesis Protocol impossible. Tommy would testify too, the voice of the enhanced children who refused to be weapons or experiments. As they walked away, Daniel looked back one more time at Rachel's headstone. Etched below her name and dates were new words added just that week. She started the fight that saved the world. It wasn't an exaggeration. Rachel Hayes, third-grade teacher, had asked the questions that unraveled a conspiracy to reshape humanity. Her courage had rippled outward, saving not just Havens Grove, but potentially millions worldwide. The water ran clean now in Havens Grove. The children grew up healthy, enhanced, or normal, all equally human. The Rachel Hayes Foundation had helped expose 17 more corporate contamination sites. The Haven Protocol had been adopted by 43 nations. And somewhere in whatever came after this life, Daniel knew Rachel was smiling. They'd won not just the battle for clean water, but the war for human autonomy. The future would be challenging, uncertain, dangerous, but it would be freely chosen, not engineered in secret labs. That was Rachel's true legacy, the insistence that every human being deserved the truth, deserved choice, deserved water that didn't poison them in the name of someone else's vision of progress. The Genesis Protocol was ended. The Haven Protocol had begun. And Daniel Hayes, Tommy Hayes and Alexandra Novak, soon to be Hayes, would make sure it continued, one exposed lie, one saved child, one clean glass of water at a time. The fight never really ended. It just evolved naturally, honestly, humanly, exactly as it should.